Dear students, welcome to my classroom of Gender Studies, Module 46 of Research Methodology course. Today I am going to highlight various aspects of gender studies. Now the question is, what is gender studies? How can we define gender studies? Is there any specific definition of gender studies? No. Gender studies does not mean that we are talking about a particular gender. Sometimes we get confused with women's studies and we think that women's studies mean gender studies, or the studies on feminism is something which is connected with the studies on gender. My argument is, perhaps which is the argument by all the social scientists, that gender studies mean the idea or to be enlightened or to be enriched with the views of various social thinkers, politicians, activists, and others about all the genders in this world, the women, the men, the people from the LGBTQA community, or the marginalized. I would like to give you an idea about what is gender studies, the various discourses on gender studies, the research questions on gender studies, the Indian perspective of gender studies, gender, body and sexuality, and gender studies, women's studies, and studies on feminism. How are they related to each other? I would like to begin my lecture with an introduction. Gender studies is something which helps us to understand the society. It's not something which is radical. It's not something which is non-conformist. It's not something where we are questioning the existing norms. Yes, to some extent we are questioning the existing norms when we are raising our voice against the exploitation. Dear students, exploitation does not mean that it is only intended to women. Exploitation means it can be for the men, for the women, and also for the others. So we need to understand the psyche of the society and how are they responding towards the various gender identities. That is my argument when I try to define gender studies. It's not something where we are trying to portray the plight of women or the sufferings of women. It's not something where we are only dealing with the negative shades of the society. Rather, gender studies is an interdisciplinary subject where the people from various branches can contribute for its betterment. In my opinion, it is something which is a multidisciplinary approach to research. For research methodology course, I feel that your ideas on gender studies would be definitely helpful for your future projects on various research. I might say that when we talk on gender studies, we might also try to explore the history, the sociology, the environment, the anthropology, and the other subjects which are related to a particular time. Gender studies is a unique branch where we can be a part of the course of the evolution of the society. Here we can apply, on the one hand, the Marxian approach to understand the various layers of exploitation. On the other hand, we can also apply the Gramscian approach of cultural hegemony, where we have seen that how language can dominate the minds of the people, how the various gender they get influenced with the power politics of language. And also we can apply what Foucault once stated, knowledge is power. So I would like to welcome you to this introductory session on gender studies. Now I would like to highlight various discourses on gender studies, that how we can proceed further. This particular branch started to grow side by side with women's studies in 1970s in US. Gradually that time gender studies was not being considered as a specific branch of knowledge. But later on from 1990s, gender studies started to take a definite shape. There are a lot of things which we can discuss in this particular field of gender studies. We can discuss the contributions of women in the field of science and technology. We can discuss black feminism, that how the women in Africa, they fought for their rights. And still, this matter is very much pertinent because still black lives matter. You know that I'm talking about the incident which took place in 2020 in US, which was a sheer example of racial discrimination. Here we are trying to relate gender studies with politics. And what I am also trying to add, gender studies mean the study of masculinity. And when we are talking about masculinity, it is something we are also trying to highlight on men. Because who are masculine? The men. Definitely women can be also masculine. That is a different story. That is the story of queer studies. So we can discuss about the various aspects of the psyche or of the personalities of human to understand their existence or their identity. And that identity can be the identity of a male or of a female or of others. Who are these others? You know well that we celebrate Pride Parade, that where we try to give respect to the other sections of the society who are marginalized. I'm talking about the LGBTQA community. Also, gender studies help us to know like how the women are trying to get their foothold in this society, how they are getting torture and also they are responding towards this kind of torture and humiliation. If we take the example of Iran, if we take the example of the countries which are not so developed, even if we take the example of India, that here we see still the vices like dowry, child marriage are pertinent and are bothering us to a great extent. When we talk on gender, that means we are also trying to see that how we are trying to help our children, how we are trying to orient our children about gender studies, the relationship between the parents and their children, because the concept of gender is something which is intellectual. It's not always biological. It's important for us to give that kind of education to our children so that they could be able to understand their orientation. Here I would like to quote Simone de Beauvoir, the French activist and social scientist, who once stated, "When we born, we are not the girls, but the society makes us girls or women. When we born, all of us are the humans. We are not the men or the women or the others, but the social norms or the society makes us to feel that what we are supposed to do." I would like to say there are more, what I can say, avenues we can explore with this regard. Here I would want to read from one of my slides. The editorial from the inaugural issue of Science, SIGNS, founded in 1975 by Catherine Stimson, explains that the founders hoped that the journal's title captured what women's studies is capable of doing, to represent or point to something. Women's studies was conceptualized as an interdisciplinary field that could represent issues of gender and sexuality in new ways, with the possibility of shaping scholarship, thought, and policy. I have already mentioned women's studies and gender studies are not different, they are the same. So here we are getting much more academic explanation of the argument which I have already stated. I would like to highlight about the others and how we can conceptualize a particular discourse. As I have already mentioned about the LGBTQA community, from there, here I am choosing the transgenders. In our country, we don't have that much respect for the transgender people. But in Europe or in America, we have seen like how the transgenders are trying to get a proper position in the society, and most of the times they are well appreciated. Here I would like to mention from one of my slides. Susan Sticker, Pursley Carre, and Lisa Jane Moore map the ways that transgender studies can expand feminist and gender studies. Transgender does not need to exclusively signify individuals and communities, but can provide a lens for interrogating all bodies, relationships to gendered spaces, disrupting the bounds of seemingly strict identity categories, and redefining gender. The trans in transgender is a conceptual tool for interrogating the relationship between bodies and institutions that discipline them. Here I would like to mention from Foucault that knowledge is power. Definitely the society, how it is trying to control our mind, that is also being reflected in our body, because mind and body both are inseparable. As the society decides that a transgender has no position in the mainstream, then they have to accept it, because we cannot go beyond the politics of power. And when we are talking about the politics of power, definitely it is linked with the knowledge or the politics of knowledge and power, both, what Foucault exactly wanted to portray. We should give emphasis on our mind and how our mind wants to operate our body. Unfortunately, we do not understand this relationship between mind and body. We feel sexuality is a subject which should not be discussed in public. It is a taboo. But have we ever felt that what is the situation of the people in our community who are unable to mix either with the male or with the female in our society because they are having some different orientation. We have never thought of the people who are marginalized, but we need to. Perhaps the researches on gender studies might help the future generations to work or to launch more movements for these people who are belonging from the other sections of the gender. Perhaps my lecture would help the students to think about the same. Now I would like to throw some research questions because I feel that in the research methodology course it's very important for the students to have a brainstorming session. What we are trying to learn, what we are trying to know, it's very important that we should also apply our learning or like that what we have gathered from this lecture in the practical environment. We should know like how we can apply our knowledge in the society so that we would be able to get a better exposure of gender studies or any other subject. So what are the research questions I have selected for this particular topic which I am right now going to highlight? Number 1, is gender different from sex? Is gender inequality based on biological differences between men and women? What does masculinity studies have to teach feminists? Is sexual orientation genetic, personal choice, both or neither? What is the meaning of transgender? And is it the same as intersex? How is power exercised and reproduced? What is intersectionality? How does popular culture influence body self-image? What are the myths and realities of the male body? How do representations of the body change over time? What role does gender play in perceptions of cultural otherness? What are the different forms of gendered violence? What role does gender play in medicine, science, and technology? From all these questions, I would like to harp on one particular question, that is on violence. Yes, I'm talking about violence on gender. In our country, which is very much pertinent, domestic violence is one of the most committed crimes in India. But unfortunately, we do not have any particular provision to control or to prevent or to stop domestic violence according to IPC or Indian Penal Code. That's why the victims of marital rape in our country, they do not get any justice. So that is also a point which we can discuss in gender studies if we would like to proceed further, if we would like to enlighten ourselves, because this is only one aspect of violence. We have also witnessed violence on men, violence on children, violence on the other sections of the society, the marginalized. All these are the part, what I can say, of gender studies so that we could enlighten and enrich ourselves, and we should be sensitized and we should be more careful and prevent others to repeat the same or to say no to domestic violence or any kind of violence to all the gender. I would like to cover 2 points which are intimately linked with gender studies, the discourses of gender studies, as I have already mentioned. So here I am just trying to maintain that continuity. Like gender studies is something which is very much related to women's studies and feminist studies. Because I have already told about this, but why I'm saying so? Because, like in the course of this lecture, I feel like the students are getting more exposure to the concept of gender studies. Women studies also talk about the people from the marginalized sections. And feminist studies is something which is trying to highlight various theories related to feminism. The question is, what is feminism? Feminism also talks on gender neutrality. If we see the fourth wave of feminism, there we can experience that the feminists, they are saying that no, we are not women, we are human beings. So this kind of gender neutrality is also visible in gender studies. So when we talk on gender studies, we are talking gender neutrality. That is also noticeable in women's studies and feminist studies as well. Now it's the time to understand the relationship between body and orientation. And when I'm talking about the orientation, that means the sexual orientation. We have two orientations. One, which is related to our physical appearance, that is biological. But we have one more orientation, that is our psychological orientation, what we feel inside. I'm a woman, but I may also feel from within that I'm a man. So these opposite ideas or these dichotomies are very much pertinent or very much common in the society. That is creating a sense of otherness. That's why body, sex and gender all are interrelated. That's why we should talk sexuality. It's not something which is prohibited. It's something which is helping us to know our identity, to know who we are. It is something which is helping us to know who we are. If we don't know our identity, if we don't know our social and our psychological position, then it would be very difficult for us to accept this world, to accept our position in this world if it's not determined by us, if it's determined by someone else, that is society. That's why we face so many problems with regard to the acceptance of the LGBTQA community. Here gender studies play an important role because gender studies can help others to understand these definitions where body and orientation which is within ourselves are related to each other, where body is talking something about not biological always, but also body is trying to perform according to its mental, what I can say, vibes. So we cannot differentiate body from the mind, and here gender plays an important role. Now it's time to talk something about how gender studies developed in India. Though unfortunately we do not have any past examples of gender studies, the ideas of women's studies, feminist studies and gender studies are all borrowed from Europe or America, especially from America, because in 1970s, women's studies started to develop in America along with feminist studies and gender studies in a subtle manner. As I have already explained, from 1990s onwards, gender studies had started taking a definite shape. I can give you the example of what Altekar, a very famous historian, once stated about women. That according to him, the women in ancient India, they had to follow the rules and regulations as mentioned in the religious scriptures. And according to these religious scriptures, women, they should always consider themselves as behind the men, and they had to perform all their obligations and duties as decided by the society. And here we also find, not in Altekar's writings but in other writings, as mentioned by Sukumari Bhattacharya, that women were being regarded as same along with the Sudras always. And who were the Sudras? The people who used to held the lowest position in the social hierarchy or in the social hierarchical system. So women and Sudras, both of them were very much deprived, humiliated in ancient Indian society. According to Uma Chakraborty, it was perhaps the first academic construction of women by Altekar, and if we follow this Altekarian model, then we might get an idea about how women's studies began in ancient Indian perspective and how it started to taking a definite shape. Later on, when we talk on Stridhan, that is something where we might say that women were getting some kind of reward in the form of jewelries because they were serving their families. This particular concept, which later took a definite shape in the writings of various feminist historians, like I am talking about Sukumari Bhattacharya or Bhattacharya, how she tried to establish her theory of exploitation and deprivation of women in the light of these examples, where Altekar also, what I can say, had a very important role behind the contribution of the construction of a particular discourse on women's studies, which also helped us to understand women as the important part of gender studies. I have already talked about the Altekarian model and also like what Uma Chakraborty stated and how Sukumari Bhattacharya or Bhattacharya, she tried to highlight the position of women in ancient India, which is also a part of gender studies. I would like to say something about ecofeminism, like how Vandana Shiva, she is trying to relate nature and women. And by relating nature and women, she is also trying to portray that nature and women both can tolerate the sufferings or the plight or the exploitations, and the exploitators are basically the male. So here we find, like when she was talking ecofeminism, she is also trying to relate ecofeminism with capitalism, where the males, they are playing the role of catalyst, because the capitalists or the bourgeois are mostly the male or the male members of the society who have the power. Unfortunately, the society is patriarchal and we don't have gender neutrality with regard to politics, with regard to the execution of power and execution of knowledge, and also with regard to how we prosper, and I'm talking about the economic power and prerogatives. I would like to end my lecture with Gayatri Chakraborty's Vivek. She stated in her Can the Subaltern Speak? That who are the subalterns? The subalterns are the people who are the proletariats or the marginalized. But we only think or we only see them from the eyes of the people who are the bourgeois or who are in the position to show their power either in the form of knowledge or in the form of politics. So we need to reconstruct or restructure the history of women, as well as we need to think more on gender studies, because there are some proportions which are still not that much highlighted and we need to think about it. Gender studies mean that it's a conglomeration of the ideas, of the values, of the morals, where we need to rework again according to Gayatri Chakraborty's Vivek. Thank you.